Thank you for tuning in to the 5th episode of the Khizr Studio Podcast. This episode, my guest is Victoria Noakes. She's an architectural designer and artist. Victoria is a fellow creative, and we both studied our part ones at Sheffield together. In this amazing conversation together, we explore some creative themes and philosophies that go into Victoria's work, but more broadly, the societal and cultural forces that shape some of our built spaces and some of the deeper artistic thinking that goes into designing the spaces around us. So I really hope you enjoy this episode.
The thing that we sort of have in common is that we started off in architecture. Yeah. We studied architecture. We both did our part twos. Yeah. You went to Central St. Martin's. Mm-hmm. And did you always have this sense that you wanted to look beyond architecture after your education, or did you think you were going to go into the architectural kind of practice?
That's a good question. It's a tough one. I think I always wanted to follow the pathway of architecture because it's a pathway, it's a career that that when you say it, people understand what it is. But on the flip side, I always had so many different skills and interests that I also didn't want to be narrowed down to just one thing. And after my master's, it was after COVID, so even our graduation, everything was a bit blurry. And I think I graduated, but then I officially finished the course maybe in December, January, and I kind of really deeply believed in my project. Like for me, maybe it didn't tick all the academia architectural tick boxes, when you're being marked. But for me, it was a project that was truly alive, and I was like, I need to, in some shape, way, or form, I need to keep pushing this out into the real world. So that's what I did.
I think the thing that has been really interesting talking to you about your work is you have this idea that it all is one cohesive piece. You don't see it as you went to university and then you did this and then you did this. You see it seems like you see it as building blocks almost. And it's as if it's one body of work from, when you started your part one to now.
Yeah, no, it's true, because I think everything you do, you can really extract and learn skills from it. And then I just like having also a good time. So whenever I do a little project, whether it's something small, just making a graphic for someone, or volunteering at a festival like Horse Festival in Belgium to help build the stages and stuff, the people you meet, the skills you learn, I truly value them. And yeah, it's true. I think also I think it's, when you graduate and you don't find a job straight away, I had probably these 6 months of knowing that I wanted to do something, but also not knowing what I was going to do. So I did an online little course on curation. I volunteered at this festival, and then I started renting my studio, and I had little projects here and there, and I started doing art workshops. And I think all of this is about communicating your ideas, but also helping people communicate theirs through art and through making spaces, making events, making graphics. So it's always this exchange.
And also it's interesting because in practice as well, it seems like there's this kind of push towards participatory design, getting communities involved in having a say in a design, in a piece of architecture or urban design. So in a way, it's very, I don't want to say in trend, but because it's not really a trend. It's something that is quite important, but it's something that you also obviously see value in the art space.
Definitely. And I think, the reason I do art and architecture is because art for me is about opening up conversation. It's a tool, basically. It's a way of letting people in and then communicating architectural ideas, whereas architecture or writing policy or installations, it's about providing solutions. So it's two things that really feed into one another. And then you're right, it's kind of in trend, these participatory events, but it's something I've naturally always been drawn to. I'm quite good with people, I think. But I would say that these participatory events, they can only really work on smaller scale. projects. So it kind of depends the type of architecture you want to practice, because I think the bigger the scale is, the more those participatory events can often become sort of more tick box like. I'm sure we've all seen this.
100%. There's some practices which definitely use it as like some practitioners which will use it as a bit of a buzzword, for sure.
Because I think for me, like these participatory events, what's interesting is not necessarily the outcome of them. It's more like the learning process that people go through, and it's about breaking down these barriers and making people understand what goes on behind architecture and planning, having this voice. It's because I think often a lot of like participatory events, they've got everyone together and it's great, it's really alive, but then boom, you design a bench. And that's great. That bench is going to be amazing. And the people who designed that bench, they're going to love it. But in 10 years' time, when they've moved away and there's new people coming in, that bench has no more meaning in a way. Whereas like the process of including people and getting them to learn and kind of, it's almost like you're designing in your own brain, the architecture, or like your identity and your belonging to a plane develops in your mind more than it is by that thing that's produced by these participatory events. That makes sense. Am I going too far?
Yeah,
it's
no.
Kind of like,
that does make sense. And I'm going to ask you, like, why do you think that's important? Because and just to say, like, just to preface that, at Khizr Studio, obviously, we're doing a very similar thing in a way.
Yeah.
You're looking at it from an art space point of view, and I'm sort of looking at this from, I suppose, a more storytelling, filmmaking point of view. But the idea of that transparency, of allowing people to have access to these, previously very sort of like exclusive design methodologies. Why have you you say like you've naturally felt like this is something you've been leaning towards? Why is it important? Like, why is it important that we actually tell people about what happens behind these closed doors, in your opinion?
Big question.
Yeah.
I think it's important that everyone knows that their own experience, like your lived experience, is valuable. Too often we think that you have to have academic words or like, very theoretical ways of understanding a situation, whether it's if we're talking about like architecture, cities, like a building. No, it's how that building has grown within the community, how it's surrounded by shop, like what the sort of links are with people around. And I think through film, or I've done like through sound pieces, if you're trying to like explain how everything is coming together, I think it's really important, and it makes people trust themselves when they have a more like emotional connection to a project, either through film or sound or through art. Makes them trust themselves, makes them then feel like they belong more.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to like sort of add, I think the kind of, there's more meaning to a place. There's more meaning for a community, and when they feel like they have certain level of ownership over that design process, or over whatever the outcome is. And when people love a place, they'll take care of a place, and they'll look after a place, and that kind of directly almost feeds into the conversation on sustainability. Because we can't really have sustainable spaces just via locally or sustainably sourced materials. It has to have we have to have an emotional attachment to it as people.
Agreed.
And that actually leads on to a question I had, actually, which I was going to ask at the end, but it kind of it feeds in quite well. The idea of like with the work at Khizr Studio, trying to understand what beauty means to people, and it's a very hard to quantify term, but this is kind of a theory I have, that the more accessible we make certain parts of the architectural process, or architecture specifically, to the layperson, the more affinity they have with that thing, i.e. more meaning, the more it means to them, and the more affinity they have with it, the more meaning, and the more, in a way, the more, I don't know if beauty is the right word, but the more attachment it has.
I know what you mean, and I agree. Like it gives a project a longer lifespan when people connect to it. Because when you talk about beauty of something, for me, beauty is something that's fleeting. It's something you can't quite put your finger on. And I think in architecture, it's not, people won't think like, I don't know, this entrance is so beautiful, that's why I'm going to live here for the next 50 years. No, it's because they were involved, they understand like the history, maybe even the history of a site before even they even started living there. You know, if it was like an old clay site and that's why the bricks are made there, you connect to it and you start then attaching like, oh, clay, yeah, I remember when I was 12, I did a clay workshop. And so in that sense, when you explore projects through different mediums, whether it be film or whatever, through art, you allow people to bring their own side to it that's intangible. And that's why, like, also what you said about like sustainability, it's not about the material in the end, it's about the process of how you got there. And when you get people involved in that process that's immaterial, intangible, like then they can share that intangible thing with others, whereas you can't.
That's actually so
it's
you're so right, and I think that's really quite profound. I think the one thing I've noticed, and you talk about like the intangible things. Do you feel like when we studied together, when we were at university, do you feel like it's something? It's hard. I was going to say like it's not something we really studied, but it's also hard to teach. You can't really teach that sort of thing. Is it more intuitive, that idea of that emotional attachment? Is it something you can teach, something you can learn, or is it something you have to? Is it something that comes out over experience, like years of experience, or something like that?
It's a good question. I think maybe a bit of both.
Yeah. Because some architects, it's interesting. Some architects are very purely technical, very purely functional. And like you, and you're one of the like people I remember, and maybe there's like maybe only a handful that you could actually think, well, their work was, their interest was in the function of emotion, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends kind of like what architecture you want to practice. But I do think, all right, let's come back to like how you're being taught. I think when you come to architecture, you often come with like a certain artistic or human sensitivity, which one? I don't know. But anyway, bit of both. So when you come with that, I think, for example, we studied at Sheffield, and Sheffield for me was like a really beautiful balance of making us think of the environmental impact of buildings, but also the social impact of buildings. I think when you learn to do all like this sites, demographic studies, you sort of like start understanding that your building will have an impact. I think if you're working at a smaller scale in practice, that's when you like really learn it. When you work at bigger practices, you're more disconnected from projects, and maybe that's less of the case. But
there's more like layers of bureaucracy and hierarchy, and you don't maybe have that kind of direct access to what the end person
also because
is experiencing.
And also because it is so big, and they're not buildings like made for a specific smaller community or one person. They're made for so many, and you can never please, and you can never like get personal with like a building for like thousands of people in a way. But no, I think it's something you develop also over time. It depends on your own values, but then again, it depends sort of like where your pathway takes you.
This is a really interesting conversation, because I don't think it's very rare for people to reach a conclusion. It's a very complex idea. This idea of emotion, the idea of what is that function of emotion, I think, and also it leads into like what is home, like what does home mean? And you like very often home is something that's very personal to us. It's an experience that we curate ourselves. Is participatory design that kind of the version? Is that the curating of the architecture as we as people curate our homes? Is that the version of that where we would feel more ownership over the architecture if we have that kind of input in its curation? If you get what I'm saying.
I do get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer these questions.
No, it's not really a question. It's just like
it's a comment.
It's just a thought. Yeah.
I think I'm still very much. I consider myself still very much at the beginning of discovering what my practice is. So it's very hard to. I think I could answer or like give a comment on that when I have a bit more. When I take a few steps back, or like in a few years' time when I look back at this. I think,
It's quite new, isn't it?
It's new. But then again, I think it just depends of like what kind of architecture you're producing, who it's for. But I think participatory design is important because I think architects, the way we're trained typically at university, we have like very strong research skills. We understand how architectural tools and events, they can really help bring really rich ideas and really feed them into the design, either just as a process or like physically in the design. But I think this works more on smaller scale projects, whereas like bigger scale projects, that like whole research side is not, I mean, it's great that you have it, but then it doesn't really feed into the day-to-day work. So like, it's kind of, I don't know if it should or would or be for your BA or master. I think BA, you kind of have to learn the basics, but when you do your MA, I feel like if you wanted to go towards a more commercial approach to practice something bigger, where your research skills, you know, about sustainability and community, they all kind of like go out the window when you go towards that. And that's fine, you know, but then that becomes more like the construction industry for me. And it's no longer architecture as we used to think about it. Architecture as we used to think about it for me now is smaller scale, more bespoke, high-end stuff where the architects really have control on interiors, on light, on design, you know, like really building it. And then you have like the third generation of what architecture is. And this is kind of where I consider myself, where I sit. It's somewhere a bit in, not really in between, but I see architects as like facilitators, because we do have this really deep understanding of society. We've got amazing research skills, amazing graphic skills, and also on the side we know how to put like a building or something together if needs be. But what I like to do is like think of my architectural skills and understanding of policies and infrastructures and budgets and all of this, and be like, oh, as an architect, like how could I intervene in that? Which table can I sit at? You know, I've done a lot of work with water. And so, yeah, I've done like installations to do with water. That requires my architectural side. I've done sound pieces with community workshops to get them to reconnect to like the Thamesmead foreshore and stuff like that. But then I meet people in all of these places and I'm like, how can I sit you together? And how can in conversations we talk about water infrastructure? And who can I meet through that? And then I would ideally love to be sitting and writing, I don't know, policies. And that's how I see like where architects can also work. Like it's more like a spatial design. So you've got very commercial, kind of like more bespoke where you're designing, and then architects that are a bit more like socially focused, but then maybe they're designing less, but it's kind of like they should be sitting at more tables, more conversations.
Well, that also that idea of like, how did you put it? You said that it's almost like the third generation of architect. It's interesting because there's a few conversations I've had where there is a feeling that this is the way we're going. This is the way the future's going to be. It's going to be less defined and a higher variety of practitioners within that space. It's not specifically going to be specialized to the architect, which is kind of interesting to think about. And it's interesting to see how like sort of policy and, you know, the Royal Institute and things like that will kind of adapt to make that work. But that's definitely sort of a, like you put it, like a new generation or like a new model that's coming about.
It's like we're almost like intersectional, like we're researchers. Yeah. We're here to like add value to projects and to research and to like, because no one, you know, the I don't know, people who build don't have time for this, people who like who are going to live in the building don't have time for, but we've got like time and the skill to like really understand how, and also and like you said, like the variety of skills we have as architects, you know, it's actually almost, when you think about it, it's kind of strange that it's only ever been focused in that one direction. Yeah. And I think that's probably why so many people start off studying architecture and go off and do other things. Yeah. Because those skills are so applicable. Because kind of in a way, exactly what you just said, all these skills that we learn at university, when you then work in practice, you're not really using them anymore. You know, it would make more sense to be like taught business and detailing and like this at university to work as an architect in the more traditional architectural practice. But then all the skills that we are taught about like creativity and research and concepts and environment stuff, like that doesn't have any more space when you're in practice. There's no time for that. There's no money for that. They can't give space to like develop these ideas. So all of that knowledge, and that's what I think frustrates a lot of architects, is that all of these exciting things, you kind of have to shed them away and like just start working a sort of more repetitive job of just getting a building up and, you know, functional. And for me, that's kind of like what people think was architecture is now the construction industry. But we don't think of, when you go to architecture school, you never think of it as like, I've got a career in the construction industry.
Right.
No, you think of yourself as like still an architect. And
you although it's labeled architect, you there's kind of this understanding that you're this broader creative, and that you're learning all these various different skills, and you know, the way you've taken your skills, the way I've taken it, the way many other people have taken it. For me, architecture school, I always call it a storytelling course. I don't call it an architecture course, because obviously the way that I've naturally gone down this route of setting up Khizr Studio, you know, storytelling in architecture, that, you know, I became very interested in how you actually tell those stories, how you present architecture, which is basically what we did at university. But someone who is more, let's say, inclined towards painting, can explore that more in depth. I mean, you see these amazing kind of almost like pieces of fine art. I mean, some of the stuff you've worked on, you know, which is amazing. And all of that, all those skills can be honed at architecture school. So it's kind of odd that it's even called architecture. But anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is kind of like a storytelling school. Yeah, I think for me, one of my biggest regrets is not, because I'm getting like, got so many ideas.
That's good.
No, I do agree. I think I wish we had been taught like sort of, I wish we were more business savvy, like at school. We had been taught more sort of practical skills or like project management skills. Like that's so important in business. And so then because we're taught all these kind of like quite creative, but incredibly valuable skills, then when we then work in practice, I think then a lot of us almost suffer a bit from imposter syndrome or something, because we're like trapped in this, not corporate, but we, you know, professional, it's here to you know, a practice has to be commercially successful. But then we've also got all these other ideas on our mind and it kind of clashes. And then I think then, you know, I was thinking about this the other day, all these like RIBA salary brackets. The other day, one of my friends was told like, oh, you're a part 2, we're going to pay you in between this and this. She was like, but I'm so much more than a part 2. And they were like, oh no, the RIBA sits, you know, that's what it says. And I was like, why? And then part of her felt like she just had to like put her head down and be like, yes, you're right. I'm just a part 2. I should be given this much because it says so. But then, I don't know, there was like this really detachment, I think, between, what the reality and like what she thought she could obtain.
I think that's a really good point, because when you go into practice, it's almost like if you go to a smaller practice, for instance, this project management side of stuff, you may have more exposure to that than, let's say, a part 3. Yet, like you say, on paper you're a part 2. So it's interesting because absolutely in practice you can learn, you can develop so much quicker. Do you think that this project management side that you and me are both skipped on because we didn't do our part 3s, do you think it's because we didn't do our part 3s that we skipped out on this? Or are you saying that it would be beneficial at that kind of...
to do it earlier. To do it earlier
than part 3,
because when you then go into practice, this is kind of what you have to learn. I think both you and I have probably like developed these skills through managing our own freelance projects now. I mean, on the financial side of things, project management, we've had to learn everything by ourselves. And I find it, weird that we never sort of did any of this at university. I think learning about project management styles or the different approaches to project management would have been way more useful than, I don't know, like... Do you remember some of the tasks we had at uni?
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
Some, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's...
What in specific?
I remember having to do like a big A1 pencil realistic drawing. Yeah. Which, I mean, I enjoyed the process because I like drawing with charcoal and stuff like that. So in that sense, But then it took a good 2 weeks probably. And in that 2 weeks, I could have been studying something else.
Yeah.
Especially now that, we do so much on computers or this, that, or like some people prefer, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like, it's interesting how quickly things have changed. I mean, if, like you said, like we had to do certain exercises, which now, I mean, you've got, for instance, computer programs that do it, but now you've got AI, which is coming along. Yeah. And, there's certain technical aspects of architecture that can easily be automated. Yeah. But the point on project management is a really good one. I think, for instance, at Sheffield, because I did my master's there too, they have this thing called live projects, which is supposed to be, and you do it two times in your master. You do it in your fifth year and your sixth year, and that's supposed to be that kind of that project management experience. So I think it seems like academia is aware of this, and maybe some institutions are kind of exploring it, but not in like as wide a scale as they could do. Yeah. Because 100%, it's a really important skill.
It's very important. I think, because I don't know, or like at uni and stuff, a lot of unis, you're taught to absolutely hate developers. And I do understand why, land prices, quality, social, like all of that is very, very poor when done by most developers. But I also know small practices who do like high-end residential, and they're doing amazing work, but they've also got this sort of like property development part of them. And I thought that was like, I only discovered this recently.
That's really interesting. I've not come across this.
Yeah, different business models for architects, and
so under the same kind of practice or same roof, they've got they've got
business. Like property development,
and they've got their design.
Scale. And it's like, why aren't more like architects just like, I think our business mindset is not developed enough.
It's very linear, isn't it? I suppose.
It's very linear.
Yeah.
And I think it's coming back to the live projects. Like, how did you feel that worked for you?
It was a great experience. It was a great group project to take part in. I think the live project is almost trying to be that lateral thing that we're talking about now. Yeah. It's trying to kind of push the boundaries out a little bit, more horizontally, as opposed to just being, that kind of vertical thing. But why do you ask?
No, because I was just reflecting on my MA at CSM, because they really pushed us to think, okay, you've got this interest. My interest was water, urban spaces, the Thames. That was kind of like my research, my main project. And, I contacted the Thames 21 and like lots of different, or the Port of London Authority, so existing networks. And then I was messaging them to see how like my research or how my ideas could fit into their existing projects. So that really like pushed me to develop these projects from paper to real life. In a way, it was kind of like I was in a dark room and I didn't quite know where I was going. But eventually things start landing and you start developing your own ideas. And that was really interesting because I was sitting between these two worlds. But I forgot what I was trying to go with this.
No, I mean, it's a very broad discussion and it's a very interesting one. And I completely agree. And I almost think, a lot of, like you said, we've kind of, from setting up our own studios, been forced to teach ourselves these things. Yeah. And I almost wonder, is it something that if you want it bad enough, so like, to put it in that term, like that you will teach yourself, that you will learn? Do you think it's something that can be like as we've done it?
Yeah, I think so. But it's just I feel like I could have been exactly where I am, maybe like
sooner,
right?
Maybe
not much sooner, because I don't think you can rush things. Yeah. But maybe I could have been where I am now, like 2 years ago. Yeah. If I had believed in myself a bit more, if I knew that I had this business, marketing, all these strategies, if I just had a bit more awareness of it. But I do think that eventually you sort of learn.
Well, you touched on a really good point there, actually, because I spoke to, in the podcast I did with Howard, we had a really interesting discussion about, because I tutor at university as well now, architecture masters, and he's a tutor, and we have this discussion about how much of architectural tutoring, mentorship is about instilling confidence versus being an amazing architect and giving your knowledge onto the student. And I found in my very limited experience that quite often the students just need that spark, and they need to feel motivated about their work. And if you can get them to feel motivated, then they'll go for it.
Yeah.
I can't remember why I made that point. What were we talking about?
About instilling confidence in people. And I was saying that if I had, like, I could have been where I am now 2 years ago because you're like just more confident in, not even if it's just like your personal self, but just like in your professional self.
Agreed. Yeah, because that's something that I come across a lot. And I mean, architecture is very difficult. There's constant design doubt, and you can feel like, paralyzed at certain points in the design process, as we both went through. It's a very taxing thing mentally. Everyone's different, aren't they? Like some students are just very good at it.
Yeah.
I never was. It took me a while to figure that out. It was.
I do think that at some point I would like to do my part 3 though.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Just so that I can be completely independent if I want, because I think then you're always kind of a bit undermined. I hate being called like an architectural assistant.
Or just
that's why I call myself an architectural designer.
Well, I hate the architectural assistant term too. I would call myself a part 2 architect, because you've done 5 years, 7 years if you've done years out.
But I do call myself an architectural designer because I think the projects that I work on are like broader than just buildings. But yeah, I don't know. I do also like, because I work I do a lot of workshops. I'm still pursuing this research on urban water. I've done I do my art, but I do also like the small scale of design.
This is your piece, isn't it?
That's one of my pieces. Yeah, it's
Tell us
what do you call it? It's one piece. It's actually there's 3 other pieces that complete it.
Okay.
But it's an electrical pylon, and I just thought it was interesting to explore the physical interventions that allow us to live this Wi-Fi. How would you say it? Like basically,
kind of modern life.
Yeah. Because like behind the wireless lifestyle,
right?
Like wireless, you just open your tap, you have water as long as you pay your bills. You have internet. You click your fingers, you've got light, and I think that all of these luxuries have physical implications behind the scenes. It's like the cloud. Ooh, everyone has like millions of people on pictures on the cloud, but actually clouds, they in reality, it's like fields and warehouses full of what do you call them?
Like servers.
Yeah, that you have to cool, that you have to power. But all of this you completely forget about. So that's a perfect example of how I like using architectural thoughts, but then represented graphically, just so that then we can have a conversation. And then some people might be like, oh wow, I'll go home and like delete a few things off the cloud tonight.
Amazing.
Yeah. But then again, not all my art is as like political or environmentally focused. There's often little bits of it, or on identity, or sometimes I just do it for fun as well.
Yeah. Well, one thing that like I quite like about your work is that you're very you focus a lot on the natural.
Yeah.
And obviously this is focusing more on the man-made, but a lot of your work looks at the natural and like water, like you said. Yeah. And I wonder like what how does that inspire you? Because it's interesting with the work I do at the studio and when I tutor as well. We talk about, for instance, in an architectural setting, site analysis, exploring the natural, exploring the landscape, understanding the soft textures versus the hard textures versus the color of a place, having a kind of hypersensitivity. No 2 places are the same ever. You've got the temporal aspect. If we were to go stand outside, that tone of light coming at that exact time of day with that kind of temperament and the weather, the wind, and
unique.
The breeze and the sound, and almost if you close your eyes and just focus on the sound, there's like a very unique experience you have there versus if you just went, a couple of steps down the street. The noises you hear and the type of light you get, where the clouds are in the sky, all of these elements create a very unique experience. And I one of the core things in our work is Khizr Studio is looking at as being hypersensitive to that kind of thing, and understanding that the internal experience of a building is defined as much by where it sits and the landscape in which it sits in, and your experience of that, as much as the actual internal experience of the architecture itself. So I wonder, that's kind of a long way of but to summarize, but in your opinion, how do you see, where does that natural influence come from in your work?
First of all, I just want to say what you just said is so beautiful, and I think it's so relevant. Again, it's like this lived experience is so important as well in architecture at the end of the day. I think for me, I think I'm always drawn to this contrast between the natural and the artificial, because the artificial, to an extent, we need it. We have our homes, we have our comfort. But then when you really push it into looking at hyper-consumption, and then in terms of architecture, where materials are from and how you make steel, and that you've got resources extracted from mines all over the world and then produced at one place, shipped to another to build something, then when you look at it like this, it becomes really scary. And so in terms of my architectural practice, maybe these are kind of more distant thoughts, and it's something that's really hard to have a true sort of impact, or to change things, because it's very hard to change things, change the world in one project. It's impossible. Maybe one material at a time, one detail at a time in your project, that's how you can have this effect. But then in my art practice, it's something I can really explore, but it's just more sort of general thoughts, but it's always about looking. I think two things, it's natural and artificial, and the kind of small scale and big scale. I'm always kind of flipping from one to the other in a way, in all my projects, which I think is kind of interesting. And because I feel whether it's an intermission tower, an electrical or lamppost, that are in our streets that we see every day, or if it's a mug, it's all these objects that surround us, that make the home, that make the city, that fascinates me, how they're made, how we compose them, how we get used to them, how I don't even question how the glaze on my mug was made, it's I live around them, but there's so many things around us to unpack. And
I think, sorry.
No, I could go on, but I'm trying to think.
No, that's good. I just wanted to make a point on something you just said, the idea of scale. I was actually going to talk about that, because that's another thing I really like in your work, is that you have this, you bring a very unique kind of texture to your work with this exploration of scale. And these are all very, the interesting thing is, it all comes back to this kind of architectural idea that these are all very architectural terms and architectural concepts. And the reason I was going to mention scale actually is because in the architectural storytelling work that we do, we also look at scale as a way to bring texture to the work. So a lot of our films you'll see look at, I like to call it the intimate scale, which is essentially the kind of human scale, the scale of a hand, or how you open a door, or how we hold each other, how we are with one another as people, and then taking that to kind of a street scale or a domestic scale, and then even further out to the urban scale, and playing with those sorts of scales brings such a texture and such a layer, layering to a piece of work, to a body of work. And I've found that whether you look at music or film or the work that you do in art, across the artistic disciplines and creative disciplines, this idea of playing between scale has this effect of bringing a dynamism and an intrigue. And to kind of give a more meta point on with Khizr Studio, and what we spoke about earlier, the idea of accessibility and people being able to have access to architectural narratives, or whatever narratives. What that kind of idea of scale allows us to do is give people that kind of visual intrigue and that conceptual intrigue to be interested to learn more. And even if you look at it from a piece of architecture, you know, some of the most successful pieces of architecture play on those ideas of scale. I mean, they've been kind of rigorously designed from many, many perspectives and angles and scales. So another kind of point on scale, I guess. How do you see time playing into your work? You know, the time scale, if you want to call it that, the concept, the idea of time. You know, there's such a sensory nature about your work, as we were talking about, this idea of being hypersensitive about kind of the natural elements. And I was wondering, you know, it's hard to be engaged with the sensory and not be engaged with kind of temporal aspects of that sensoriness, you know, whether it be sound, whether it be water, movement, you know, landscape, all of these have kind of a seasonality to them. So where does, in your opinion, like where does time come into this, you know, the idea of the temporalness of your work?
That's a really beautiful question or way of framing sort of art, architecture. Are we talking more about like the artistic side of my practice, or
whatever you want? Which one? Which one's?
Maybe. No, I guess it kind of applies to both. I think.
Well, what's the other aspect of your practice?
Oh, well, art, architecture. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I kind of divide them because I see it as like a looping thing.
Okay.
But then, to be fair, it's all the same.
Interesting.
It's all one. It's all one. But I think. I think thinking of time again with this thing of artificial, natural. Maybe I'm a bit cynical. Like it both fascinates me and fills me with fear. The idea that, you know, we are, as humans, we're very temporary on this earth, and so also when we are creating something or conceptualizing something, taking into account like the point of view of the earth or non-human sort of participants is also really interesting and important. And it's not, I'm not saying like you should take a rock and interview it and take that and like put it in your participatory statement. No, but it's really kind of thinking of how our work has an impact beyond what we can actually see, beyond the sites, you know, looking at these resources far and beyond, and this timber and from, you know, forests, and so, and also like being responsible for that. But yeah, this idea of time, the idea that you know, we might be within a building or looking at these ideas just for a very short amount of time, but these things will probably outlive us, and they should be able to outlive us, but be both good for the people and environment or the other things apart from humans that not speaking about aliens. Not going into that.
We're not conspiracy theorists.
No. But yeah, but when you start talking about the non-human and like the other point of views, it can often sound very wishy-washy. But I think that there's a because again, people will like think of it as like a physical outcome, but it's more of like a process or an approach to design and to art.
No,
like sustainability or like feminism. For me, they're like really like methodologies. They're processes. They're not just outcomes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so you're almost talking. I mean, I thought you were meant when you were talking about like the Earth and stuff.
Yeah.
That kind of geographic age
also.
or time scale.
Yeah, no, also.
But then also like you just mentioned, like concepts or ideologies.
Yeah.
You know, they also have. I don't know how this is such a broad conversation. It's hard to like. It's a but I kind of get what you're saying. It's such an interesting idea, like the idea that ideas.
Yeah, I think this is like the artistic side. I love it. Exploring these concepts, but I don't quite know where to take them.
Yeah, no, it's wicked.
But
it's the best way I find to like really explore ideas is just to talk about them, because other people will have kind of maybe insights, but. I mean, the idea of time also, it evokes that idea of memory, because you can't have memory without time. Yeah, so memory then also comes into the picture. Mm-hmm. And you were talking earlier, you gave a really good example of like, you may go into a space and there may be something that reminds you of your childhood or something like that. Maybe it's a particular color on the wall, or the way the window has been designed, or the amount of light coming in, the type of mood there is. I think we've all had that. Maybe that's like, that deja vu feeling, you know, like you walk into a space and that idea of hypersensitivity, you know, that idea of the conditions are almost as they were in a memory you had a long time ago, and it feels like you've been there before. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah, the idea of memory is quite powerful, quite interesting.
How do you think it's going?
It's going really good.
Not that there's a right or wrong.
There's no right or wrong, and also you're in a kind of space that I think a lot of people are very interested in.
It's definitely. I think. Not to boast or anything, but it's true. Like, I think a lot of people do look at where I'm at now and do feel quite inspired, which is exactly what I kind of want to do with my practice. Is like, it's always make what I'm doing accessible for others, and like I love to help people along the way as people have. Not that, I mean, some people have helped me, but you know what I mean. I kind of want to like help people realize that they can do it too. And it's the same with architecture. It's like breaking down those barriers. Like, you can have an input, you can do this as well. Like any small lived experience is valuable. But coming back to what you just said, like, I think where I'm at now is quite interesting because, I mean, it's still very early days, but I truly believe in like the little things I've done, and I'm just slowly, I'm like picking away at different little bubbles of where I can work, either as an artist or an architect, or because that a theme is similar to what I like, or I've got experience in research. It's just, you can find so many opportunities to work. And I'm sure you find that in film as well, because you can do film to explain the project, you can do a film to ask questions, you can do a film for competition, you can do something that's finished, you can do something that's more conceptual. There's so many opportunities. And I'm sure also in film now, there's more than just film. There's probably like a bit of animation or, yeah.
Yeah. And
so many opportunities. How do you find, actually, yeah, how do you find, maybe this is not podcast appropriate, but like, how do you find like opportunities as a freelance
like actually find them?
Yeah. Or like what, or like, how did you start?
I started by just offering to do work for people that I knew. I think my first few bits of architectural film were for tutors from university, and then gradually realized that that there's something here that is not being done currently. You know, the films I was producing had much more affinity with non-architects as well as architects, and I think it was because they were coming from a point of view of an architect, from an architectural background, as opposed to I'd never had a film background or a storytelling, like technically I didn't have a storytelling background, yet in architecture all we do is storytelling. So I think that gave the films a huge amount of legibility and a huge amount of strength, that they had very legible architectural story, but they also had really really coherent production quality, and those two things came together. So I think when I realized that was kind of a little bit of a recipe that was kind of working, I just kept doing it and refining it and sort of thinking, well, how can we communicate architecture more elegantly and effectively? And this actually comes to probably the final kind of point actually that I wanted to talk to you about, is what is the kind of, in your opinion, and I think you've touched on this already, but what's the kind of big vision? What mark does Victoria want to leave on the world? And from my own like studio, I see the kind of problem we're solving, or the function, really the purpose of the studio is to inform people really, and allow them to touch this profession in a way that they never could before. And it probably is, you said it so well, like this new generation of architects, we're being more transparent. And I think Khizr Studio is maybe a small piece in that, but that, it's trying to communicate these architectural stories in a way that normal people, the layperson can understand them.
Yeah.
So I see that as the kind of big vision for the studio, and a really important thing for us to do, because not only will it benefit architectural practice through more interest, by public having more interest in what we do, but also it benefits the public, because the more they understand about the design process and how we construct space and place, the better high quality spaces they'll demand from councils and commissioning bodies and things like this, and then we grow up with better things. So I think that's the kind of big picture for Khizr Studio. Now I wonder, like with your work, what's your grand kind of vision, I guess, if there is one?
So I think that's a really good question. And I think my vision is very similar to yours. But the only difference is that I would be doing architecture, but without actually building or without the physical aspect of it. No, or maybe not. Maybe yes.
No, that's interesting. What do you mean? So what do you mean by that?
So I think I'm interested in, as you say, like really making things accessible and educating people on the architectural world and on materials and on cities and how they're put together. But also through workshops, through events, through installations, through like curating spaces, through creating exhibitions. That's how I kind of see where I work, and how kind of with people you can write new policies that then have an impact on the physical world, or how people can then demand things. But I won't necessarily. So it's very similar to you, but I guess I won't be the one doing the big like designs. Like if we're talking about like a new residential block or something, I don't think I'll be the architect doing that, but I'll be the one. It's kind of like a circle. So, you know, you've got like the architects designing, but before that even comes here, you've got like the policies before that, you know, and so you've got policies that then will allocate budgets, and then budgets then get these things built, right? But before here, then there's the people that use it, right? But I want to intervene with the people that use it and how they understand policies of that. So I want to work like here. So then it influences all of this cycle in a way. That's how I see where my work is. But then again, I do also really love design. I love creating beautiful things, beautiful places. And so that's also why I would be tempted to do my part 3, to be able to work on like smaller scale projects, more kind of like, you know, high-end residential. But then I can also like, you know, do art or like sculpture or installations for maybe, you know, a hotel or something like that. I would still have this flexibility of sometimes doing design, but then also being in that kind of educational and making things accessible.
You're sort of sitting between those two worlds.
Yeah. But that's what I do now. But I would like to push it more. Like, I think what it comes down to is like, at the moment, I really want to like keep building this network of people who sit between the construction industry, behind the built environment, but also places, you know, that are more sort of artistic, curational, like the people at the Tate or people at the GLA, like understanding how all these people work, and then it kind of I can sit between them and jump from project to project. That's what I would love to do.
Does that role exist currently, or do you see it as being something that?
Well, I think I was very much inspired by some of my tutors at Sheffield. Not Sheffield, sorry, at Central St. Martin's. Shout out to
But they have good tutors at Sheffield.
Yeah, they also do have good tutors. But no, I was very inspired by some of my tutors who are doing this.
Okay, so it is something that there is a space there.
Yeah. I think it does exist, but then you really have to push for it yourself. But I feel like hopefully, in a short-term future, people will already understand, but maybe it needs a different title because, you know, architect, they'll confuse it with what the traditional architect was. But yeah, somehow maybe there'll be a different title or term. Spatial designer, I think, is still a bit too loose. Architectural designer as well. I don't know, there's something missing.
Yeah.
It's almost like an urban consultant or an artistic, not artistic, because then people, it gets too superficial when you like sort of go into artistic things. But yeah.
No, I love that.
An urban consultant.
Yeah.
That's how I see myself, maybe.
That's fantastic. I think it's people like you that have this vision for the future that are going to end up changing the world in a better way. And I think that design, a lot of the stuff that unfortunately we build in this country is bloody boring. And I think a key component missing is that participatory element. And that's something that we're learning as an industry, and we're maturing into that. That's my view, at least. So, and there are some practices that are doing really good work on this, and they're starting to think ahead in regards to this. You still get the odd vanity projects and things like that, but it seems like there is a kind of shift happening where that's becoming less and less, and the more communal, societal values and meaning of a piece of architecture is getting more and more.
Yeah. But then coming back to earlier in the conversation, I still don't think you can do these on like big scale projects. It has to say like small or like medium scale. I genuinely don't think you.
Why don't you think you can do it? What is the limiting factor with?
Because like big projects are for me like more in the construction industry realm. Like you have no control. You are like a small part of like a bigger, and we need these big buildings as well. But you're very small cog in the bigger machine of land prices, developers, engineers, consultants, all kind of like. So then the architecture side is very small, and just then like I don't know.
Let's say this vision you've got of this urban consultant. Do you think that in future there may be? I mean, we already know this is a bit of a simplification, but the Dutch model of how developments are procured, there's a huge influence from the landscape architect, and obviously with having such an influence from a landscape architect means that a lot of consideration and generosity is shown to open space, green space, public realm, which leads typically to slightly more humanized spaces. We sort of in our industry we have the kind of the developer is at the top, and the development industry is also changing, and they're also learning about these things. But do you think that there is a space, kind of like the Dutch model, where in the future you might have this urban consultant, which developers have to consult even on the big projects? Let's say a 300 home development or something.
But I still think that maybe it still comes down to the fact that like these huge buildings, I still feel like even if you just look out the window over there, like I don't see how that can ever be like human, even if it's designed with the best materials, sustainable materials, even if it's just like the physical scale of it compared to like a human being. Like it's something that will never be human. So maybe it's not in the practice side of things. I just think as cities are built, maybe
it's not in the physical kind of manifestation of the building. Maybe, like we said, the ownership, the communal ownership is in the process. So maybe they'll still end up with that, like concrete and glass and metal, which is most of London these days. But because it was designed with input.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Or does then that just become a tokenistic thing? Like
it could, I don't know.
And therefore devalues it.
But look, so you would need that process of identity and belonging and caring for the people who both live in it, but then all the people who are affected by it. Like we're probably 300 meters away from that, and maybe people who live in it were consulted or like the direct neighbors, but we will never be. So us living in this city, we will always be disconnected from these very big things. And I think these very big things, they also reflect, this like mass consumption and like hyper-globalization, which obviously we can't just be like, oh, don't want to do that tomorrow, We can never just like stop. But it's like, I think we need to enter this mindset, this process of being responsible, consuming less, reusing more. And I think that's where also I come in, kind of. It's helping like people with this transition, this educational way of changing their mindset, in a way. Maybe that's very naive of me. But
no, I don't think so.
And I don't think that I can do this like single-handedly. I think, like I've always said, that like the workshops I do, maybe I have 20 people in the workshop, maybe 3 of them will really kind of have like this moment of like shift, a microsecond of like, oh wow, I need to change something, or like, so you can only change things like little by little, small pockets, and I'm at peace with that, it's just like little by little. So maybe I kind of see myself as like someone who's because I think this kind of reality of like, even if we're talking about more like development following a Dutch process, like this won't happen overnight. It might take like 20, 30, 50 years, to like happen in the UK for it to be like a more like normalized practice, for it to be the norm. And I won't be like around practicing it like.
Why do you think it will take so long? Is that just the kind of?
Don't you think it will? Do you think it? Like for every,
it might do.
For like 75 of practices in the UK to adopt that model.
Say that again.
For you would, I'm okay. For it to be like a reality, 75+% of practices in the UK would have to adopt that model for it to be a reality. For it to be for me to consider it as like a norm, probably. Yeah. In the building industry. How long do you think that would take?
It's hard. It's hard to predict, but
it definitely 20 years for 75%.
Oh right, yeah. I mean, it's hard to predict, but I mean, I'm optimistic about the regulation.
Yeah.
I feel like my with my kind of experience of practice, my exposure to practice, it feels like regulation is going in that direction. It feels like even before regulation, actually practices are taking a more altruistic approach, if you want to call it that. They're kind of putting people before money in a way. Maybe slowly. Yeah, for sure. God, I mean, it could. You might be right, but I really hope it happens quicker.
So do I. But like, imagine it does happen in 20 years, right? In between, those 20 years, I see myself as kind of like someone that's like educating and breaking down the barrier of like, environmental sorts of like issues, and just getting people to reflect more on the industry and breaking it down, making it more accessible. That's where I see myself. But I can't wait 20 years,
No.
to like start practicing. So in between that, I'll do that and see where it goes.
Yeah. No, that's amazing, Vic. We're kind of like, I'm taking up loads. We're just talking a lot, which is great.
I could keep talking.
No, that's good. It's
good. I feel like I don't really know what I just said.
I feel like there's one more. There's one more. Maybe before we. I mean, it's just so interesting what we've covered already. But before we wrap up, it would be good to talk about maybe the collective, the Palestine Collective, and your work on that. And
I mean, I was almost going to mention it. One, because we spoke of like what is the home, and two, earlier on we were speaking about maybe our skills and like what we can do with. I forget what we're talking about, but yes, definitely, let's talk about it. I mean, it's been how long have we been? It's been like,
we set up in October, didn't we?
In October, yeah.
So it's been half a year, more than
6 months,
more than half a year.
Yeah. No, it's been a really, really great process. I think that I'm so excited to see where it goes. But already in 6 months, we've achieved so much in terms of events, in terms of, I think also just like creating a platform for people to be able to share and learn.
Well, do you want to like explain what it is?
Yeah, I guess the Palestine Collective. It's how many of we are? We like about 30, 40, 60. It's growing. Architects, designers, artists, and we're all working together. For me, it's really to one, celebrate Palestine culture, heritage, memory. And we're doing so by using architectural tools, whether it's mapping, drawing, looking at history through architectural events or through architectural tools to be able to talk about it. That's what it is for me in a way. It's about celebration and education, and that's a form of activism for me. But it's also creating a platform for architects and designers to be able to discuss this without fear of being censored by either institutions or their workplace. And that's what it is in a nutshell. And
I think, you nailed it.
Do you want to add
I was just going to say on that last point that because we're from the architectural world, and there's this big kind of, it's very difficult for practitioners, for academics to say anything about what's going on in Palestine without fear of losing, losing work or actually losing their jobs, you know. So I think the idea of the collective is to allow, this right of democracy and liberty that is a fundamental British right, to allow that to exist, to champion that, and to and there should be no ideology that can't be criticized, and that's what we fundamentally believe.
And I think it's been so interesting to also use architectural tools as proof, whether it's geographical maps and sort of like comparing sites over years, or looking at homes, looking at, there's so many rituals that happen within space. And I think this is part of being an architectural designer rather than just an architect. It's understanding how culture is embodied by space, and how political regimes also are reflected in space, and how architects, in the UK maybe don't have like a direct impact on that, but it also makes us think more deeply about, our responsibilities as architects and that other architects across the world have. And actually someone shared an article the other day about what is it? It's an arms factory in the UK that was
it the one that was shut down?
It was applying for planning for an extension, to build an extension for this factory, and that's something that most members of like the audience who are not non-architects would never think about checking the planning registry or how to oppose it or what this actually means. But this is something very spatial, like an extension of a building in the UK then can have repercussions somewhere else because they're producing them. I just thought that was so fascinating. So as architects, that's also something that we have an implication or are involved with, not directly, but it's within our like profession, like where are the ethics between like get planning or not or whatever. And then also it's like making people aware of that it's planning, it's spatial now. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting article.
No, that's super interesting.
That was shared. And also about and celebrating culture as well, but and really kind of like archiving in a way culture and heritage and making sure that it's not forgotten about or erased, because through architecture we can like preserve these moments, which I think it's also quite Mike sorry it's been quite like an emotional sort of thing that we've done all together, because what's been amazing is that it's completely self-organized. Like we've managed to organize this over weekly Zooms, over WhatsApp, which is an amazing, also it's like an invisible building community. We've got our different little meeting rooms and stuff. I think it's fascinating, and I can't wait for what we do in the future.
It's interesting, because it's always because we don't have the resources, we don't have the recognition, we don't have the status. We are the underdogs, and usually it's interesting when we look at history. It's usually those groups that are underfunded, under-resourced, have to think of new ways to innovate and pioneer to get their message across. And what we've been so good at doing is using what tools we have. We've been very resourceful in trying to do that, and it's incredible like how it's. We don't. No one pays us to do anything. We just do it out of our, the passion we have, and it's amazing how far passion can get you. When you come together, and again, it comes back to that conversation of participatory design.
Learning on the go,
having kind of more of a collective approach to solving a problem. And if you look at a building as solving a problem, whether it's a block of apartments or a museum. You're bringing people together to solve a problem, just like we're doing with the collective. The problem is obviously much bigger and different, but it's the same kind of concept.
But see, then again, it comes down to scale, because what we're doing is still quite like localized, smaller scale. So I think when things then grow, it's harder to then keep that control, keep that same like participation and stuff. Like things can grow, but in smaller little pockets. So like who knows how the Palestine Collective will evolve in a way. And maybe we're already doing that, because we also do have like all these little working groups, so people have different responsibilities, and in that sense these little different sections can expand and contract like kind of individually, like on their own, but we're under the same umbrella.
It's incredibly fluid, isn't it?
It's very fluid, but who knows how it might go, because it's also true, like people have different ways of thinking about what we're doing, what they want to do, but because I guess also what we're doing, rather than kind of like militant activism, it's really through joy and culture. It's through education. That's why I really like it as well. And it's a very specific lens. I mean, the exhibition we did for the London Festival of Architecture a few weeks ago, for me, this was incredible. It was looking at what is home, but through architecture and through talks and through lived experience and through drawings and amazing artists and architects or students who've like crystallized little moments of this without trying to answer a whole question, or it was so beautiful, and the conversations it unlocked. This was incredible, and for me this is really what we're doing that's so special. It's a very specific lens, like we're looking at Palestine through architecture, through memory, and it's incredible.
I think you nailed it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's
And also it's worth saying, you know, all the beautiful graphics on Instagram is all done by you. So,
thank you.
you know, it really does look like a really coherent. I mean, looking at the kind of our online output, you'd think it was a body of incredibly well-paid professional people in an organization, but it's just us. You know, we're just doing it in our own spare time and things like that.
I think you know, again, architecture, like this is why, like I did a foundation years ago in graphic design, but it's mainly through architecture and through you know, putting
those
on
skills that have come through,
putting on events, you know, and like because I've done a lot of graphics, but also kind of like I have a very good understanding of how to manage events and just kind of like down to earth little things like I don't think that will work because I'm sourcing back from past experiences, and that's why I love having done all these little things. You know, it allows you to do so much more, and
it comes back to bring it all full circle. You know, that thing we spoke about at the beginning of your work, where you're looking at bringing in all these influences and growing, as opposed to moving on to something new. Yeah. I think that's a fantastic way to view your work.
Yeah, because like who am I? You know, like I can't have all the skills in the world. I can't, you know, and it's about finding others that can complement what we're doing, working together. It's about sharing as well, you know. If you're winning, I'm winning. That's how I see it, and it's about moving forward to collectively.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vic.
My
Thank you for your time. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching another episode of the Khizr Studio Podcast. It was a real honor to talk to Victoria. What an amazing conversation. Victoria's going to give a little. Do you want to tell us your Instagram tag?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got two, so make sure you follow both. I've got @V_NKS. This is more photography, architectural research, bit my life, things that inspire me in the city. And then I've got the @Victoria_Noakes_art.
We'll put it on the screen as well.
Yeah.
We'll put it on the screen. You've forgotten your.
I forgot my handle. No, but it's that.
We'll put it on the screen.
That's my art account. I don't know if is it Victoria Noakes.
It's fine. It's going to be on the screen.
Yeah, no, I got it right. I got it right.
So yeah, go follow Victoria, check out her amazing work, and see you on the next episode. Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much.